The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in June 1882, and Lydia Hartford read it 3 times before crumpling it in her fist and throwing it across the parlor of her small boarding house room in Newton, Kansas. Her aunt's words, even transmitted through dots and dashes across copper wire, still managed to sting with their particular brand of condescension. "Stop this foolishness. Come home. No cowboy wants a woman with opinions. You will die an old maid." Lydia stood and smoothed down her practical calico dress, the one with ink stains on the cuffs from her work at the Newton Kansan newspaper office. She was 23 years old, and for the past 8 months, she had been living exactly the life she wanted, writing articles about land disputes, cattle drives, and the railroad expansion that was transforming the Kansas prairie. Her father, God rest his soul, had taught her to read and think and question everything. Her mother had died when Lydia was young, and her father had raised her as he might have raised a son, filling her head with books and ideas instead of needlework and recipes. When he passed 2 years ago, her aunt in Philadelphia had taken one look at Lydia's independent ways and declared her unmarriageable. Perhaps her aunt was right. The men in Newton certainly seemed to think so. The banker had stopped tipping his hat to her after she wrote an editorial questioning his lending practices. The sheriff avoided her after she pointed out in print that his deputies spent more time in saloons than on patrol. Even the minister had given her a cool reception after she suggested, very politely, that the church might do more to help the widows and orphans left behind by the violence that still occasionally flared in this cattle town. But Lydia had not come to Kansas to be liked. She had come to write the truth. She retrieved the crumpled telegram and tossed it in the wastebasket, then gathered her notebook and pencil. Her editor, Mr. Thornton, had assigned her to cover the arrival of a new cattle outfit from Texas, and she intended to get the story, even if it meant standing in the dust and heat of the stockyards all afternoon. The sun beat down mercilessly as Lydia made her way toward the pens on the edge of town. Newton had grown up around the railroad, and the constant lowing of cattle and the acrid smell of livestock were as much a part of the town as the church bells and the whistle of the afternoon train. She could hear the commotion before she saw it, the shouting of cowboys and the thunder of hooves as a new herd was driven into the holding pens. A crowd had gathered, mostly men in dusty work clothes and broad-brimmed hats. Lydia positioned herself near the fence where she could see and began taking notes. The cattle were longhorns, their distinctive horns spread wide, their hides ranging from brown to brindle to an occasional dusty red. They looked exhausted from the long drive north, but the cowboys looked even more worn, their faces burned dark by the sun, their clothes stiff with dirt and sweat. "Miss Hartford." She turned to find Thomas Weber, the livestock agent, regarding her with barely concealed irritation. Thomas was a thick-bodied man with a perpetual scowl and a wife who never met Lydia's eyes at church. "Mr. Weber," she replied pleasantly, "I am here on behalf of the newspaper. Might you tell me about this herd?" "This is not women's business," Thomas said flatly. "You should not be here. The newspaper's readers will want to know about the arrival of such a large herd. It affects the local economy, the railroad traffic, the availability of beef for market." Lydia kept her voice level and professional, though her heart beat faster with frustration. This was the same conversation she had been having for 8 months, with slight variations with different men. Women do not understand such things. Thomas turned his back on her dismissively. Lydia felt her temper rise but swallowed it down. Losing her composure would only confirm what men like Thomas already believed about women and their supposed emotional fragility. Instead, she moved along the fence, looking for someone else to interview. She spotted a tall figure near the main gate, directing the flow of cattle with calm efficiency. He was clearly the trail boss, distinguished by the way the other cowboys deferred to him and the quality of his horse, a magnificent bay gelding that stood at least 16 hands. The man himself was lean and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by his hat, his movements economical and purposeful. Lydia approached, her notebook ready. "Excuse me, sir. I am Lydia Hartford with the Newton Canson. Might I ask you some questions about your herd and your journey?" The man turned, and she found herself looking up into a face that was sun-bronzed and angular, with a straight nose and a firm jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as a thunderstorm and startlingly direct. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze traveling from her face to her notebook and back again. "You are a newspaper woman." His voice was deep, with the slight drawl of Texas. "I am a journalist, yes." Lydia straightened her shoulders, preparing for the inevitable dismissal. Instead, the man swung down from his horse with an easy grace and removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that badly needed cutting. "Harrison Quade, madam. I am pleased to make your acquaintance." He extended his hand, and after a moment of surprise, Lydia shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from years of hard work. "You do not object to being interviewed by a woman?" The question came out before she could stop it. Harrison's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Why would I object? If you have questions, I have answers. Seems straightforward to me." Relief and something else, something warmer, flooded through Lydia's chest. "That is very kind of you, Mr. Quade. First, perhaps you could tell me about your herd. How many head and where did you begin your journey?" For the next 20 minutes, Harrison answered her questions with a thoroughness that both impressed and delighted her. He explained that he had brought 1,500 head up from southern Texas, a journey of nearly 600 miles that had taken 3 months. He described the rivers they had crossed, the storms they had weathered, the constant vigilance required to prevent stampedes and keep the cattle from wandering. He spoke knowledgeably about the market conditions, the quality of the grazing land they had passed through, and his plans to sell the herd before heading back to Texas for another drive in the fall. Lydia's pencil flew across the pages of her notebook, capturing not just facts but also details. The way Harrison's face softened when he spoke of his men, the obvious pride he took in having brought his herd through safely, the flicker of exhaustion in his eyes that suggested he had not slept properly in weeks. "You mentioned you will return to Texas," Lydia said, glancing up from her notes. "Is that where your home is?" "I have a small ranch outside of San Antonio," Harrison said. "These drives help me build my herd, save money to expand. But yes, Texas is home." Something in his voice when he said the word home made Lydia curious. "Do you have family there?" "No, madam. My parents passed some years back and I was an only child. It is just me and the land now." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Lydia heard the loneliness underneath. "I am sorry for your loss," she said quietly. Harrison met her eyes, and she saw surprise there, as if he had not expected such personal sympathy from a journalist. "Thank you, Miss Hartford. And you? What brings a lady journalist to Newton, Kansas?" It was Lydia's turn to be surprised. Most people, especially men, showed no interest in her story. They were too busy being scandalized by her very existence. "My father died 2 years ago," she found herself saying. "He was a newspaperman himself in Philadelphia. He taught me the trade. When he passed, I found I could not breathe in that city anymore. Everything reminded me of him, and my aunt, with whom I lived, disapproved of my work. So I came west, looking for a place that might need what I have to offer." And has Newton been that place? Harrison asked, and there was genuine interest in his question. Lydia hesitated, then decided on honesty. The editor gave me a chance, which I am grateful for, but I will not pretend it has been easy. Many people here believe women should not have opinions, let alone publish them. That seems foolish, Harrison said, his tone flat and definitive. In my experience, women have just as many thoughts worth hearing as men do, sometimes more since they often see things men miss. The words landed in Lydia's chest like sparks on dry kindling. She stared at him, searching his face for sarcasm or mockery, but found only sincerity. "That is a rare perspective, Mr. Quade," she managed. "Is it?" He looked genuinely puzzled. "My mother ran our ranch for 5 years after my father was injured. She made every decision, managed every hand, dealt with every buyer. She had more backbone and business sense than most men I have known. It would never occur to me to think a woman's thoughts matter less than a man's." Lydia felt something crack open inside her chest, some tight place she had not realized she had been protecting. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Harrison said, and the past tense carried a weight of grief. Then he seemed to shake himself slightly and gestured toward the cattle. "Is there anything else you need for your article, Miss Hartford?" "No, you have been extremely generous with your time." Lydia closed her notebook. "I truly appreciate your willingness to speak with me." "The pleasure was mine, madam." Harrison put his hat back on, and Lydia felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. The interview was over. He would go back to his work, and she would return to her office to write up her notes, and that would be the end of it. But then Harrison said, "I expect we will be in Newton for at least a week while the cattle are inspected and sold, and my men rest up. I wonder, Miss Hartford, if you might allow me to call on you. Perhaps I could take you to dinner one evening." Lydia's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She should say no. She had learned long ago that romantic entanglements only complicated things, and besides, Harrison would be leaving for Texas soon. There was no future in it. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "I would like that very much, Mr. Quade." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard angles and making him look younger. "Tomorrow evening, then. Shall I call for you at 6? "I am staying at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house on Main Street," Lydia said. 6 would be perfect." As she walked back toward the newspaper office, her notebook clutched to her chest, Lydia felt as if she were floating several inches above the dusty street. It was absurd, she told herself. One interview and an invitation to dinner did not mean anything. Harrison Quade was just being polite, or perhaps he was simply lonely after months on the trail, and she was convenient company. But even as she told herself these sensible things, she could not stop smiling. The article Lydia wrote that afternoon was one of her best. The words flowed easily, painting a vivid picture of the cattle drive, the men who had made the journey, and the economic impact on Newton. Mr. Thornton read it with his usual scowl, but when he finished, he gave a brief nod. "Good work, Miss Hartford. This will run on the front page tomorrow." The praise, rare as rain in August, made Lydia flush with pleasure. She left the office in high spirits, stopping by the general store to purchase a new ribbon for her hair, a frivolous expense that she immediately regretted, and then decided she did not regret at all. That evening, as she dressed for dinner with extra care, her fellow boarder, Mrs. Eliza Morrison, knocked on her door. "I heard you have a gentleman caller," Eliza said with poorly concealed curiosity. She was a widow in her 40s, kind but prone to gossip. "I am having dinner with the trail boss of the Texas outfit that arrived today," Lydia said, trying to sound casual as she pinned up her hair. "It is professional courtesy, really. He gave me an interview. Professional courtesy." Eliza's tone made it clear she did not believe that for a moment. "Well, he must be a progressive sort if he does not mind your newspaper work." "He is," Lydia said, remembering Harrison's words. "I want a woman with opinions." Or had he said that? No, he had said something about women's thoughts mattering just as much as men's. But the sentiment was the same, and it made her heart race every time she recalled it. When Harrison arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, Lydia was waiting in the boarding house parlor, wearing her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. She had agonized over her hair before settling on a simple style that she hoped looked elegant rather than severe. Harrison had clearly made an effort as well. He had bathed and shaved, his dark hair still damp and neatly combed back. He wore a clean white shirt, a black vest, and a string tie, and he looked so handsome that Lydia felt momentarily breathless. "Miss Hartford," he said, and his eyes traveled over her with unmistakable appreciation. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Quade, you look very well yourself." They walked to the hotel restaurant, one of the nicer establishments in Newton, and as they moved through the streets, Lydia was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. She recognized several people from church, and she could practically hear the gossip that would be racing through town by morning. But when she glanced at Harrison, he seemed utterly unbothered by the attention, his hand resting lightly at her elbow in a gesture that was both protective and respectful. The hotel dining room was half full, and the waiter showed them to a table near the window. As they settled into their seats and ordered their meals, Lydia felt some of her nervousness ease. Harrison had a way of making conversation feel natural, asking her about her work, her interests, her thoughts on everything from literature to politics. "Have you read Mark Twain?" he asked at one point. "I managed to get hold of a copy of The Prince and the Pauper during the winter, and I found it fascinating." Lydia nearly dropped her fork. "You read Mark Twain?" Harrison looked amused. "You sound surprised." "Forgive me, I just did not expect a cattleman to be interested in contemporary literature." "Long nights on the trail leave a lot of time for reading," Harrison said. "I carry a few books in my saddlebag. They help pass the time when I am on watch." They discussed books then, and Lydia discovered that Harrison had read widely despite his limited formal education. He had taught himself from whatever volumes he could borrow or buy, and his insights were thoughtful and often surprising. "My father used to say that a person who reads widely is never truly alone," Lydia said. "Books are companions that never disappoint." "Your father sounds like he was a wise man," Harrison said gently. "You must miss him terribly." "Every day," Lydia admitted. "He was my best friend as well as my father. We would discuss everything together, and he never once suggested that my thoughts were less valid because I was a woman. When he died, I lost not just a parent but my greatest champion." Harrison reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. The touch was brief, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "I understand," he said quietly. "When I lost my mother, I felt as if I had lost my compass. She was the one who always knew what to do, what to say. Without her, I felt adrift for a long time." They looked at each other across the table, and Lydia felt a connection snap into place between them, something deeper than attraction, though there was plenty of that as well. This was recognition, she realized. They had both lost the people who understood them best, and they had both learned to navigate a world that did not quite know what to make of them. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of good food and even better conversation. Harrison told her about Texas, about the ranch he was building, about his hopes for the future. Lydia told him about Philadelphia, about her father's newspaper, about her dreams of one day running a publication of her own. "Why not here?" Harrison asked. "Why not in Newton?" Lydia laughed. "Can you imagine? This town barely tolerates me writing articles. They would never accept me as an editor or publisher." "Then perhaps you need a different town," Harrison said thoughtfully. "Or perhaps you need to change this town's mind. I am not sure that is possible." "I have found that most things are possible if you are stubborn enough," Harrison said with a slight smile. "And you strike me as a very stubborn woman, Miss Hartford. Is that a compliment or a criticism?" "It is the highest compliment I know how to give." When Harrison walked her back to the boarding house, the summer evening had cooled to something almost pleasant, and the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. They paused on the porch, neither quite ready to say good night. "I enjoyed this evening very much," Harrison said. "More than I have enjoyed anything in a long time." "As did I," Lydia replied. Her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Might I call on you again tomorrow?" Harrison asked. "I know I will be busy with the cattle sale during the day, but perhaps we could take a walk in the evening." "I would like that," Lydia said, and then, feeling bold, added, "Very much." Harrison smiled, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply romantic. "Until tomorrow, then, Miss Hartford." "Until tomorrow, Mr. Quade." Lydia practically floated up to her room, and she lay awake long into the night, replaying every moment of the evening in her mind. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Lydia tried to focus on her work, writing up notes for several upcoming articles, but her thoughts kept drifting to Harrison. She wondered how the cattle sale was going, whether he was thinking of her, whether he would indeed come calling that evening, or whether last night had been an aberration, a moment of loneliness on his part that the light of day had dispelled. But at 6 o'clock, Harrison arrived at the boarding house, this time wearing a dark blue shirt that matched his eyes, and the smile he gave her when she opened the door erased all her doubts. They walked through Newton as the evening light turned golden, talking about everything and nothing. Harrison told her about the successful sale of his cattle, about the relief his men felt at having completed the drive safely. Lydia told him about the article she was working on about the new schoolteacher, and Harrison listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. As they walked, Lydia became aware once again of the stares they were attracting, but this time she also noticed something else: hostility. Several men looked at Harrison with open disapproval, and more than one woman whispered behind her fan as they passed. "Does it bother you?" Lydia asked finally. "The way people are looking at us." Harrison glanced around as if noticing for the first time. "Should it?" "I have a certain reputation in this town," Lydia said carefully, "for being difficult, unwomanly, the sort of person respectable folk avoid." "Because you write for the newspaper. Because I have opinions and I am not afraid to express them." Harrison stopped walking and turned to face her. They were standing near the edge of town, where the neat houses gave way to open prairie, and the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and rose. "Lydia," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need you to understand something. I do not care what anyone in this town thinks, and if they believe having opinions makes you unwomanly, then they are fools. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I feel privileged to walk beside you." Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Harrison said firmly. "I know you are brave enough to come west alone. I know you are talented enough to make a place for yourself in a profession that does not want you. I know you are honest and kind and smart as hell. What else do I need to know?" "That I am stubborn and hot-tempered and I argue with people constantly," Lydia said, but she was smiling through her tears. "Good," Harrison said. "I want nothing less." And then he kissed her, soft and sweet and careful, and Lydia felt the world narrow down to just the two of them. This man and this moment and this feeling of being wholly, completely understood. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it is too soon, and I know I am leaving in a few days, but I need you to know that. You have become important to me in a way I did not expect and cannot quite explain." "I am falling in love with you too," Lydia whispered. "And I do not care if it is too soon. I feel as if I have been waiting for you my entire life." They stood there as the sun sank lower, holding each other, and for the first time since her father's death, Lydia felt as if she had found her home. Over the next 3 days, Harrison and Lydia spent every possible moment together. They took long walks, shared meals, and talked for hours about their hopes and dreams and fears. Harrison met with buyers and sorted out the final details of his cattle sale, but he always made time for Lydia, and she found herself rearranging her work schedule to accommodate their time together. On the 4th evening, as they sat on a bench outside the boarding house watching the stars emerge, Harrison took her hand. "I have to leave tomorrow," he said, and the words fell between them like stones. Lydia had known this moment was coming, but that did not make it any easier. "Back to Texas?" "Yes, I need to check on my ranch, make sure everything is in order, and then I will be preparing for another drive north in the fall." He paused, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "Come with me." Lydia's heart stopped. "What? Come back to Texas with me? Marry me, Lydia?" "I know it is fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You belong with me and I belong with you." "Harrison." Lydia could barely breathe. "I have my work here, my position at the newspaper. You could write in Texas. San Antonio has 3 newspapers and they are all growing. Or you could start your own publication. I would help you. We could build something together, Lydia. A life. A future." It was everything she wanted and everything she feared. To leave Newton, to leave the small foothold she had gained in the world of journalism, felt like abandoning the dream she had been fighting for. But to stay here, to watch Harrison ride away tomorrow, felt like tearing her own heart out. "I need time to think," she said finally. Harrison nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Of course. It is a big decision. I should not have sprung it on you like that." But that night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Lydia could not sleep. She kept thinking about what Harrison had said, about building something together. And she kept thinking about her aunt's telegram, those cruel words. "No cowboy wants a woman with opinions." Her aunt had been wrong. Harrison wanted exactly that. He had looked at all the parts of herself that the world found difficult and unacceptable, and he had said, "I want nothing less." By morning, Lydia had made her decision. She found Harrison at the stockyards, supervising as his men prepared for the journey back to Texas. When he saw her, his face lit up, then grew wary as he read her expression. "Lydia, I cannot come with you," she said, and watched his face fall. "Not yet, but I will come. I need to settle things here first. Give my notice at the newspaper, tie up loose ends, make proper arrangements. It will take a few weeks, maybe a month. But then I will come to San Antonio and I will marry you if the offer still stands." Joy blazed across Harrison's face. "If it still stands, Lydia, I will wait for you however long it takes. A month, a year, a lifetime." He pulled her into his arms right there in front of his men and half the town and kissed her thoroughly. Someone whistled, and someone else called out something ribald, but Lydia did not care. She was too happy, too certain that she was making the right choice. When Harrison finally released her, he was grinning. "I will send you a letter as soon as I get back to the ranch, and I will send money for your journey. You should take the train. It will be safer and faster than making the trip by stage." "I have money saved," Lydia protested, but Harrison shook his head. "You are going to be my wife. Let me take care of this." He cupped her face in his hands. "Besides, the sooner you get there, the sooner we can be married, and I am highly motivated to make that happen as quickly as possible." Lydia laughed and kissed him again. "1 month, I promise. I will be in San Antonio in 1 month." Watching Harrison and his men ride out of Newton later that morning was one of the hardest things Lydia had ever done. She stood at the edge of town, waving until they were nothing but dust on the horizon, and then she went back to the newspaper office and gave her notice. Mr. Thornton took it better than she expected. "I suppose I cannot blame you," he said gruffly. "That Texas man seems solid. And truth be told, Miss Hartford, you have been too good for this town. They do not appreciate what you have done here." "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." "I will write you a letter of recommendation," Mr. Thornton said. "If you want to find work in San Antonio, it might help." Lydia felt tears threaten. "I would be very grateful." The next 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Lydia sold most of her belongings, keeping only what she could carry. She said goodbye to the few friends she had made in Newton, including Mrs. Morrison, who cried and wished her well. She wrote to her aunt, informing her of her engagement, and received a frosty reply suggesting that she was making a terrible mistake. Lydia threw that letter in the fire without a second thought, and every few days, a letter arrived from Harrison. He wrote about his ranch, describing the land and the house in such detail that Lydia felt she could see it. He wrote about his plans for their future, about the room he was preparing for her, about his eagerness to show her everything. And he wrote about his love for her, words so tender and heartfelt that Lydia read them over and over until she had memorized every line. Finally, on a warm day in late July, Lydia boarded the train for Texas. She had sent a telegram to Harrison letting him know when she would arrive. And as the miles rolled past and Kansas gave way to Indian Territory and then to Texas, her excitement built until she could hardly sit still. The train pulled into San Antonio in the late afternoon, and Lydia pressed her face to the window, trying to take in everything at once. The city was larger than she had expected, bustling and vibrant, with a mix of Mexican and American influences that gave it a character entirely different from Newton. And there, on the platform, was Harrison. He spotted her the moment she stepped off the train, and his face broke into a smile that made her heart soar. Then he was pushing through the crowd, and she was running toward him, and they collided in a tangle of arms and laughter. "You are here," Harrison said, holding her tight. "You are really here." "I am here," Lydia confirmed, and then she was crying and laughing at the same time. "I am sorry. I do not know why I am crying." "Because you are happy," Harrison said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "At least I hope you are happy." "I am so happy I can barely stand it." Harrison collected her trunk and helped her into a wagon, and as they drove out of San Antonio toward his ranch, he pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the area. Lydia drank it all in, feeling as if she were waking from a long sleep. Everything here was different from Kansas. The vegetation, the light, the very air itself. It was strange and new and wonderful. The ranch, when they reached it, took her breath away. It was not large by Texas standards, Harrison explained, just a few hundred acres. But to Lydia, who had grown up in the cramped streets of Philadelphia, it seemed vast. The house was a low adobe structure with a wide porch, simple but solid, and when Harrison helped her down from the wagon and led her inside, she found it clean and well kept if sparsely furnished. "It is not much," Harrison said, suddenly shy, "but it is ours, or it will be once we are married." "It is perfect," Lydia said honestly. "When can we be married?" Harrison grinned. "I took the liberty of speaking to the priest. He can perform the ceremony tomorrow afternoon if you are willing." "Tomorrow," Lydia felt a flutter of nerves. "That is very soon." "We have already waited a month," Harrison pointed out, "and I am not a patient man when it comes to you." He pulled her close, his voice dropping. "I want you to be my wife, Lydia. I want to fall asleep beside you every night and wake up to you every morning. I want to build a life with you here on this land. So yes, tomorrow seems perfect to me. But if you need more time, I will wait." Lydia thought about it for all of 3 seconds. Tomorrow is perfect. They were married the next day in the small church in San Antonio, with Harrison's few friends and neighbors as witnesses. Lydia wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that she had bought in town that morning, and Harrison wore his best clothes. And when the priest pronounced them man and wife, Harrison kissed her with such tenderness and passion that Lydia forgot there was anyone else in the room. Afterward, they returned to the ranch, and Harrison carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing. He set her down gently in the main room, and suddenly the laughter faded, replaced by something deeper and more intense. "I love you," Harrison said, his hands framing her face. "I will love you until the day I die, Lydia Quade." "Lydia Quade," she repeated, testing out the name. "I love the sound of that, and I love you, Harrison, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." Their wedding night was everything Lydia had hoped for and more. Harrison was gentle and patient, taking his time to explore and learn what pleased her, and Lydia discovered that the passion she had always poured into her writing could be channeled into this too, into the physical expression of love. They made love twice, falling asleep tangled together, and when Lydia woke in the early hours of the morning to find Harrison's arm around her waist, she felt a contentment so complete it was almost frightening. The next weeks passed in a golden haze. Harrison showed Lydia every inch of the ranch, teaching her about cattle and horses and the rhythms of ranch life. Lydia, in turn, began exploring San Antonio, and true to his word, Harrison helped her make connections with the local newspapers. Within a month, she had sold her first article to the San Antonio Daily Express, a piece about women's experiences on the frontier that was so well received the editor asked for more. "I told you," Harrison said when she came home bursting with excitement about the editor's response. "You are too talented to be silenced. This town is lucky to have you." They fell into a rhythm, dividing their days between work and each other. Harrison managed the ranch, and Lydia wrote, and in the evenings they would sit on the porch and talk or read, or simply enjoy the comfortable silence of two people who were utterly at ease together. But their happiness was not without its challenges. Harrison's neighbors, while generally friendly, included a few who looked askance at Lydia's work. One woman in particular, Mrs. Delilah Brennan, the wife of a wealthy rancher, made her disapproval clear. "It is unnatural for a married woman to be writing for newspapers," Mrs. Brennan announced at a church social in September. "A wife's place is in her home, tending to her husband and children." Lydia, who had been helping set out food, felt her temper flare, but before she could respond, Harrison appeared at her side. "My wife's place is wherever she chooses to be," he said pleasantly but firmly. "And I am proud of her work. She has a gift for writing, and it would be a waste for her not to use it." Mrs. Brennan's mouth pinched. "Well, I suppose everyone has their own ideas about marriage." "Yes," Harrison agreed. "And in ours, Lydia and I are partners. We support each other's dreams. I would not want it any other way." He took Lydia's hand and led her away, and she heard him mutter, "Foolish woman," as if there is only one right way to build a marriage. Lydia squeezed his hand, love flooding through her. "Thank you for defending me." "Always," Harrison said simply. "I will always defend you, Lydia. You are my wife, but more than that, you are my best friend." I want you to be happy, and if writing makes you happy, then anyone who objects can answer to me." As autumn deepened and the days grew cooler, Harrison began preparing for another cattle drive. This time, he explained, he would be taking his own cattle north to market in Kansas, a herd he had been building for 2 years. "It will take 3 months, maybe longer," he said one evening as they lay in bed. "I hate the thought of leaving you for so long." "I will miss you terribly," Lydia said, "but I understand. This is your livelihood, our livelihood, and I will have my writing to keep me occupied." "You could come with me," Harrison suggested, but Lydia shook her head. "A cattle drive is no place for me, and we both know it. I would slow you down and be a distraction. Besides, I have a series of articles to write for the Express. No, you go. I will be here when you get back." Harrison pulled her close. "I will write whenever I can, and I will think of you every single day, as I will think of you." Harrison left in early October with a herd of 500 cattle and 3 hired hands. Lydia stood on the porch and waved until he was out of sight, then went inside and threw herself into her work. She wrote articles about the daily life of ranch wives, the Mexican vaquero tradition, and the complex web of water rights that often led to disputes. Her work gained a following, and the editor of the Express began running her pieces regularly, but the nights were lonely. Lydia missed Harrison with an ache that was almost physical, and she found herself counting the days until his expected return. Then, in late November, she received a telegram that made her blood run cold. "Harrison injured. Come quickly. Newton, Kansas. Signed, Dr. James Wheeler." Lydia did not waste time panicking. She closed up the house, arranged for a neighbor to look after the livestock, and took the first train north. The journey that had seemed to pass so quickly in July now felt interminable. She could not eat, could barely sleep. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities. What had happened? How badly was Harrison hurt? Would she arrive in time? The train pulled into Newton on a cold, gray afternoon in late November, and Lydia practically fell out of the door in her haste to reach the doctor's office. She found it on the same street where she had once lived, and she burst through the door without knocking. Dr. Wheeler, a kindly man in his 50s, looked up from his desk. "Mrs. Quade, where is he? Is he alive? Please tell me he is alive." "He is alive, doctor," Wheeler said quickly, rising to his feet. "He is in the back room. He was gored by a bull 3 days ago. The wound became infected and he has been feverish, but I believe he is through the worst of it now." Relief made Lydia's knees weak. "May I see him?" "Of course. Follow me." Harrison was lying in a narrow bed in a small room at the back of the doctor's office. He was pale, his face drawn with pain, but when Lydia entered the room, his eyes opened and he smiled weakly. "Lydia." She was at his side in an instant, taking his hand. "I am here. I came as soon as I got the telegram." "I am sorry," Harrison said, his voice hoarse. "I did not want you to worry. You were gored by a bull and you did not think I would worry." Lydia tried to sound stern, but her voice shook. "What happened?" "Stupid accident," Harrison said. "We were loading cattle onto train cars and one of the bulls got spooked. Went after one of my men and I tried to get between them. The bull caught me in the side." He grimaced. "Doctor says I am lucky it did not hit anything vital." "You could have died," Lydia whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But I did not," Harrison said, lifting his free hand to wipe away her tears. "I am right here and I am going to be fine. Dr. Wheeler says I will be back on my feet in a week or 2. "You are not going anywhere for a while," Lydia said firmly. "You are going to rest and recover and I am going to take care of you." Dr. Wheeler cleared his throat from the doorway. "Actually, Mrs. Quade, I think it would be best if your husband stayed here for another few days, just to make sure the infection does not return. But after that, he should be well enough to travel home." "Then I will stay here in Newton until he is ready," Lydia said. She took a room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, and for the next week, she spent every waking hour at Harrison's side. She read to him, talked to him, and when he was strong enough, argued with him about staying put and not trying to leave before he was fully healed. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met," Harrison said one afternoon, but he was smiling. "You knew that when you married me," Lydia replied. "Yes, and I would not change a thing." During those long days in Newton, something else happened. The townspeople, many of whom had been so cold to Lydia when she lived there, saw how she cared for Harrison, and their attitudes softened. Women brought food and offered help. Men asked after Harrison's health and expressed admiration for Lydia's devotion. One afternoon, Mrs. Brennan, the woman who had criticized Lydia at the church social, stopped by. "I heard your husband was injured," she said stiffly. "I wanted to offer my condolences and prayers for his recovery." "Thank you," Lydia said, surprised. Mrs. Brennan hesitated, then added, "I may have been hasty in my judgment of you. It is clear that you love your husband very much, and that he loves you. Perhaps there is more than one way to be a good wife." It was as close to an apology as Lydia was likely to get, and she accepted it graciously. By early December, Harrison was well enough to travel, and they took the train back to San Antonio together. Harrison slept most of the way, his head on Lydia's shoulder, and she watched the landscape roll past and thanked God that he had survived. Back at the ranch, Harrison recovered slowly. The injury had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit, and it was weeks before he could do more than light work. Lydia took over many of the ranch tasks, learning to care for the livestock and manage the day-to-day operations with the help of a hired hand. She also continued her writing, and she found that the experience of nearly losing Harrison gave her work a new depth and urgency. In January, as Harrison regained his strength, they received news that changed everything. A large ranching operation to the west had gone bankrupt, and the land was being sold at auction. It was nearly 1,000 acres of good grazing land with access to water, exactly what Harrison needed to expand his operation. "We cannot afford it," Harrison said, studying the notice. "Even if we pooled everything we have saved, it would not be enough." But Lydia had an idea. Over the past months, she had been writing steadily, and her articles had earned her a modest income. More importantly, she had been corresponding with a publisher in New York who was interested in collecting her frontier articles into a book. If she could secure an advance on that book, combined with their savings, they might have just enough. She wrote to the publisher immediately, explaining the situation, and to her amazement and delight, he agreed. The advance was generous, more than she had dared hope for, and when she showed Harrison the letter, he stared at it in disbelief. "Lydia, this is incredible. You did this. You made this possible." "We made this possible," Lydia corrected. "Together." They bought the land in February, and Harrison threw himself into the work of expanding the ranch with an energy and enthusiasm that showed he had fully recovered from his injury. Lydia continued writing, and in the spring, her book was published to positive reviews. The San Antonio newspapers wrote glowing articles about the local woman whose frontier writing had captured national attention, and Lydia found herself something of a celebrity. Through it all, Harrison remained her staunchest supporter. He read every word she wrote, offering feedback and encouragement. He boasted about her success to anyone who would listen, and he never, not once, suggested that her work was less important than his. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Harrison took her hand. "I have been thinking," he said. "We have been married almost a year now, and it has been the best year of my life, but there is something missing." Lydia turned to him, curious. "What is that?" "A family." I know you are busy with your writing and I do not want to pressure you, but I would love to have children with you, Lydia, when you are ready." Lydia smiled. "I have been thinking the same thing, and I believe I am ready, or as ready as anyone ever is." Harrison's face lit up with joy, and he kissed her thoroughly. "We are going to be wonderful parents, I just know it." "I hope you are right," Lydia said, laughing, "though I have no experience with children beyond being one myself." "We will learn together," Harrison said, "just like we have learned everything else." By the summer, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and a fair amount of anxiety. Harrison became almost comically protective, insisting that Lydia rest more and work less, though she ignored him for the most part. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from lifting a basket of laundry. "I know, but I worry," Harrison admitted. "What if something goes wrong? Then we will deal with it together," Lydia said gently. "But worrying will not change anything. We have to trust that everything will be fine." Her pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and winter, and Lydia continued writing, though she did slow down somewhat in the final months. Her editor at the Express was understanding, holding her position open and running reprints of her earlier articles. In late February of 1884, after a labor that lasted nearly 24 hours and tested both Lydia and Harrison to their limits, their son was born. They named him Henry James Quade after both their fathers, and Harrison cried when he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Harrison whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Lydia, he is absolutely perfect." Lydia, exhausted but elated, smiled. "He has your eyes. And your stubbornness, judging by how long he made us wait," Harrison said, making her laugh. Becoming parents transformed them in ways both expected and surprising. Harrison discovered reserves of patience and tenderness he had not known he possessed. Lydia found that loving her son did not diminish her love of writing, but rather enriched it, giving her new perspectives and insights. They learned to juggle the demands of ranch life, parenthood, and Lydia's career. It was not always easy. There were sleepless nights and moments of frustration, times when they snapped at each other out of sheer exhaustion. But they always came back together, remembering why they had chosen each other in the first place. When Henry was 6 months old, Lydia received an offer from the Express to become a regular columnist, writing a weekly piece about ranch life and the changing West. It was a prestigious position and well paid, and Harrison encouraged her to take it. "But who will watch Henry while I am writing?" Lydia asked. "I will," Harrison said simply. "Or we will hire someone to help. We will figure it out, Lydia. You deserve this opportunity, and I will not let you pass it up out of worry about logistics." So Lydia accepted the position, and they hired a young Mexican woman named Rosa to help with Henry and the household tasks. Rosa was competent and kind, and Lydia found that having help freed her to focus on her writing without guilt. The years that followed were full and rich. The ranch prospered, growing into one of the most successful operations in the region. Lydia's column became widely read and admired, and she published 2 more books, both of which sold well. Henry grew from a baby into a bright, curious toddler, and then a boy who loved horses and books in equal measure. In 1886, Lydia gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Lily and Margaret. Harrison was beside himself with joy at having daughters, and he proved to be a doting father who was equally comfortable changing diapers as he was roping cattle. "You are going to spoil them," Lydia said one evening, watching Harrison rock both babies simultaneously while humming a lullaby. "That is my right as a father," Harrison replied with a grin. As the children grew, Lydia made sure to instill in them the same values her father had taught her. Think critically, question everything, and never let anyone tell you that your thoughts do not matter." Harrison backed her up completely, treating their daughter's opinions with the same respect he showed their sons, and teaching Henry that women were equal partners in all things. "Your mother is the smartest person I know," Harrison told Henry one day when the boy was about 8 years old. "And your sisters will be just as smart. Never forget that intelligence and capability have nothing to do with whether you are a man or a woman." "Yes, sir," Henry said seriously. "Mama writes for the newspaper. That is important work." "Very important," Harrison agreed. "And you should be proud of her." "I am," Henry said simply, and Lydia, overhearing the conversation from the next room, felt tears spring to her eyes. The years rolled on, marked by both joys and sorrows. They lost neighbors to illness and accidents, the harsh realities of frontier life. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, times when money was tight and the future uncertain. But through it all, Lydia and Harrison stood together, their love deepening with each passing year. In 1890, when Henry was 6 and the twins were 4, Lydia received an offer that both thrilled and terrified her. A group of investors in San Antonio wanted to start a new newspaper, one that would focus on social issues and reform, and they wanted Lydia to be the editor. "It is everything I ever dreamed of," Lydia told Harrison one night after the children were asleep. "But it would mean so much more work, so much more time away from the ranch and the children. I do not know if I can do it." Harrison took her hands. "Do you want to do it?" "Yes," Lydia admitted. "But I am scared." "Of what?" "Of failing, of being away from the children too much, of not being a good enough mother or wife." "Lydia." Harrison's voice was firm. "You are an extraordinary mother and wife. Our children are happy and healthy and loved, and as for failing, well, you might. Or you might succeed beyond your wildest dreams, but you will never know unless you try, and I will support you either way." "What about the ranch?" Lydia asked. "What about all the work here?" "We will hire more help," Harrison said. "The ranch is doing well. We can afford it. And honestly, I would rather see you chase your dreams than stay home and resent the opportunity you passed up." Lydia looked at her husband, this man who had never once asked her to be less than she was, and she felt love wash over her like a wave. "I want to try," she said. "Then try," Harrison said, and kissed her. Taking on the editorship of the San Antonio Advocate was one of the most challenging things Lydia had ever done. The work was demanding, the hours long, and there were plenty of people who doubted that a woman could run a newspaper successfully. But Lydia threw herself into the role with determination, and she quickly proved her critics wrong. Under her leadership, the Advocate became known for fearless reporting and thoughtful commentary on issues ranging from labor disputes to women's rights to the plight of Mexican Americans in Texas. Harrison kept his word, taking on more of the domestic responsibilities and never complaining. He read every issue of the Advocate and often provided Lydia with story ideas based on what he heard from other ranchers and townspeople. He was, in every sense of the word, her partner. The children adapted to the new arrangement with surprising ease. Henry was proud of his mother's position and often boasted about it to his friends. Lily and Margaret, growing up seeing their mother as both a homemaker and a successful professional, absorbed the lesson that women could be anything they chose to be. On a warm spring evening in 1895, Lydia and Harrison celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary. The children were staying with neighbors for the night, and the house was blessedly quiet. They sat on the porch, just as they had done so many times before, watching the stars emerge. "You remember the night I asked you to marry me?" Harrison asked, his arm around Lydia's shoulders. "Of course I remember. I thought you were insane, proposing after knowing me less than a week." "I was insane," Harrison agreed. Insane with love, and I have never regretted it, not for a single moment." "Neither have I," Lydia said, leaning into him. "You gave me everything I did not know I wanted. A home, a family, a partnership where I could be fully myself." "You gave me the same things," Harrison said. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, building a ranch but not really building a life. You changed everything, Lydia. You made me understand what it meant to truly love someone, to be a team." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Lydia said, "Do you remember what you said to me that day at the stockyards, when I told you people thought no cowboy would want a woman with opinions?" "I said I wanted nothing less," Harrison replied, "and I meant it. I still mean it. Your opinions, your fire, your refusal to be anything other than yourself, those are the things I love most about you." "I am glad," Lydia said softly, "because I have no intention of changing." Harrison laughed. "I would be disappointed if you did." As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, they talked about their children, their dreams for the future, and all the small, ordinary details of life that made up a marriage. And Lydia thought about how far she had come from that young woman standing in the Newton stockyards, taking notes, and trying to prove herself to a world that did not want her. She had found more than she ever expected to find. She had found love, partnership, and a life that was rich and full and entirely her own. She had found a man who valued her not despite her opinions and ambitions, but because of them. In the years that followed, Lydia continued to run the Advocate with skill and passion. The newspaper became one of the most respected publications in Texas, known for its integrity and its willingness to tackle difficult subjects. Harrison continued to expand the ranch, and their partnership, both personal and professional, only grew stronger. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his mother's love of words and his father's love of the land. He eventually studied journalism in the East before returning to Texas to work at the Advocate alongside his mother. The twins, Lily and Margaret, both inherited their parents' independent streaks. Lily became a teacher, advocating for better education for all children regardless of background. Margaret followed her father into ranching, eventually taking over the day-to-day management of the Quad Ranch and proving that a woman could be just as capable a rancher as any man. In 1905, as Lydia and Harrison celebrated their 23rd anniversary, they looked around at the life they had built together and felt nothing but gratitude. Their children were thriving, their businesses were successful, and their love for each other remained as strong as it had been on that first evening in Newton when Harrison had looked at this opinionated, headstrong woman and said he wanted nothing less. They were sitting on the porch once again, a tradition that had become sacred to them over the years, when Harrison said, "I think we should take a trip." Lydia looked at him in surprise. "A trip? Where?" "Anywhere you want. The children are grown. The ranch and the newspaper can manage without us for a few weeks. I want to see more of the world with you, Lydia. We have worked so hard for so long. We deserve some time just for us." Lydia felt a rush of excitement. "I have always wanted to see the Pacific Ocean." "Then that is where we will go," Harrison said decisively. "California. We will take the train and see the country and end up on the coast watching the sunset over the water." They made the journey that fall, and it was everything they had hoped for and more. They traveled through mountains and deserts, saw cities and wilderness, and finally stood together on a California beach, watching the sun sink into the Pacific while waves crashed at their feet. "This is perfect," Lydia said, her hand in Harrison's. "You are perfect," Harrison replied and pulled her close. They returned to Texas renewed and ready to face whatever came next. And what came next were grandchildren, first from Henry, who married a fellow journalist, and then from Lily, whose husband was a schoolteacher. Margaret remained unmarried, declaring that she was too busy running the ranch to bother with romance, though Lydia suspected her daughter simply had not yet met anyone who could match her strong will. As Lydia and Harrison aged, they slowed down but never stopped. Lydia continued to write her column, though she stepped back from the day-to-day management of the Advocate, turning that over to Henry. Harrison remained involved with the ranch, though Margaret had clearly become its heart and soul. On a quiet evening in the spring of 1910, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Harrison turned to Lydia and said, "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Lydia agreed. "Better than I ever could have imagined that day I stepped off the train in Newton." "Do you ever regret it?" Harrison asked. "Leaving your career in Kansas to come to Texas with me?" Lydia looked at him, this man who had loved her so completely and so well for nearly 3 decades, and she smiled. "Not for a single moment. You were right, Harrison. We built something together. Something real and lasting and beautiful. A life, a family, a legacy. That is worth more than any career I might have had on my own." "You did not give up your career," Harrison pointed out. "You just changed where you practiced it." "True," Lydia conceded. "And you made that possible. You have spent our entire marriage supporting my dreams, even when they made your life more complicated. Not every man would have done that." "Then not every man is as smart as I am," Harrison said with a grin. "I knew from the moment I met you that you were extraordinary. Trying to change you or limit you would have been like trying to cage the wind, pointless and cruel." "I love you," Lydia said simply. "I have loved you from almost the first moment I saw you, and I will love you until I take my last breath." "And I love you," Harrison replied. "My brilliant, opinionated, magnificent wife. You are everything I never knew I needed." They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands and comfortable in the silence that comes only from years of deep companionship. Around them, the ranch that they had built together hummed with life. In the distance, they could hear Margaret giving instructions to the ranch hands. From the house came the sound of grandchildren visiting, their laughter bright in the evening air. This, Lydia thought, was what happiness looked like. Not the grand, dramatic moments, though they had had those too, but these quiet times of contentment and connection. She had been told, so many years ago, that no cowboy would want a woman with opinions. But she had found a man who said he wanted nothing less, and together they had built a life that honored both of their strengths, both of their dreams. As they rose to go inside, Harrison pulled Lydia close and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for everything." Lydia smiled up at him, her heart full. "Thank you for asking, and for never, not once in all these years, making me feel like I had to be anything other than who I am." They walked inside together, hand in hand, just as they had done for nearly 3 decades. And behind them, the Texas sky filled with stars, endless and bright, a reminder that some loves are as vast and enduring as the universe itself. The years continued to unfold gently. Lydia and Harrison grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps growing slower, but their love never diminishing. They were blessed with more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, and their home was always filled with the sound of family. The Advocate continued to thrive under Henry's leadership, maintaining the standards of integrity and fearlessness that Lydia had established. Margaret's ranch became known throughout Texas as one of the best-managed operations in the state, a testament to her skill and dedication. Lily's schools educated hundreds of children, many of whom would not have had access to quality education otherwise. On a peaceful morning in the spring of 1918, Harrison and Lydia celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, and their bodies were not what they once were, but their spirits remained strong. 36 years, Harrison marveled. It feels like yesterday and like a lifetime all at once. I know what you mean, Lydia said. She was writing less now, her eyesight not what it had been, but she still kept journals, recording her thoughts and memories for future generations. They spent the day quietly, visited by their children and grandchildren, surrounded by love and laughter. And as the sun set and their family departed, leaving them alone once more, they returned to their porch, to the place where they had shared so many evenings over the years. "If I could go back," Harrison said, "to that day in Newton when I first saw you standing by the stockyards with your notebook, I would not change a thing. I would still fall in love with you. I would still ask you to marry me after less than a week. I would still build this life with you." "As would I," Lydia said, her voice soft but certain. "You gave me everything, Harrison. You gave me a home where I could be myself. You gave me children who know that women and men are equals. You gave me a partnership built on respect and love. You gave me the freedom to pursue my dreams while also building a family. That is a rare gift." "We gave those things to each other," Harrison corrected gently. "That is what partnership means." They sat together as darkness fell, and the stars emerged, just as they had done thousands of times before. And Lydia thought about all the moments that had led her to this place. Her father's death, her aunt's cruel words, her journey to Kansas, that fateful day at the stockyards when a trail boss from Texas had looked at her not with disapproval but with interest and respect. She thought about all the people who had told her that no cowboy would want a woman with opinions, and she thought about the man sitting beside her who had said he wanted nothing less. She thought about the life they had built, the children they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. And she knew with a certainty that went bone deep that she would not change a single moment. Every struggle, every triumph, every ordinary day had brought her here, to this place of peace and love and fulfillment. "I am so glad I met you," she whispered. "As am I," Harrison replied, and raised her hand to his lips, just as he had done on their first evening together all those years ago. They remained on the porch until the night grew cool, and when they finally went inside, they did so together, still hand in hand after 36 years of marriage. And in the morning, they would wake up side by side, ready to face another day of the life they had created together. A life built on love, respect, and the revolutionary idea that a woman's opinions were not just acceptable but essential. It was, Lydia thought as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, the greatest love story she had ever known. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Not because there were no struggles, but because they had faced every struggle together. Not because Harrison had rescued her, but because they had rescued each other from loneliness and from a world that tried to tell them there was only one right way to love, to marry, to build a life. They had proven that world wrong. And they had lived happily, fully and completely, from that first evening in Newton to this quiet night in their 70s. A testament to the power of love that accepts, celebrates, and honors every part of who we are.